Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone. Thank you very much for joining us. I know we have people from all over the world, and it's a huge treat to have you with us today. My name is Kayana Pancioni. I'm the Associate Conductor for the Orchestra of St. John's, and I'm the Director of the We Are Water project. We Are Water is a series of electroacoustic orchestral compositions composed by Limpet Space Race, who I'll introduce in just a second, that meld OSJ strings with researchers' field recordings and the band's experimental DIY electronics, which I'm kind of surrounded here in the studio. And we're doing this to raise awareness about global water security. It's one of our greatest challenges in the 21st century, and it's going to require all of our efforts across all of the sciences and all of the arts to confront this issue. So this past July, we had the wonderful opportunity to record two new pieces written by Limpet Space Race for OSJ and their own playing, so their own electronics and performances, and that's Earth Flow and Reaching Water. And they were recorded this summer at Ovada, which is a gorgeous arts warehouse here in Oxford. So today we're going to have the opportunity and also the science behind the compositions. After that, we'll also hear the premiere screening of Reaching Water. So Earth Flow has already been out, and many of you perhaps have seen that. Reaching Water, the audio has been released, but today we'll see for the first time the video, which would be exciting. And then after that, after we've done all of our bits and we've shown you all of the music and the videos, you'll have a chance to ask us questions. But actually, so as we go along, please, as the questions come up, put them in the chat, either in the Facebook stream or on the YouTube stream, and we'll take a look and we'll make sure that we get to as many as we can at the end. So just to do introductions, that's all my kind of first bit. But to my left here, we have Hannah Jakes, who is the first half of Limpet Space Race and Upcycled Sounds being the studio that we're in here today. And Nico O'Brien is the other half of Limpet Space Race and Upcycled Sounds. Limpet Space Race, as I said earlier, is, as it's described, I want to get this right, a duo mishmashing pop, jazz, prog, and DIY electronics. If you don't know what that means, don't worry. Check them out on Bandcamp, check them out on SoundCloud. But basically, it's a lot of fun, really exciting, interesting music. And over on my right is Elise Chotard, who is a science communicator, and she's here also in her role as Communications and Knowledge Exchange Manager for the REACH program, which is based at the University of Oxford. And we're going to hear a lot more about that today. So today we're going to start off with exploring Earth Flow, so the first piece in this series. And Elise is going to take you into the background of the science that actually inspired that. And it was the Himalayas to Ocean project in Nepal, which actually was a couple of years ago now that started off. But I won't say any more about that and turn it over to Elise. Welcome, Elise.
Great. Thank you so much, Kayana. It's my pleasure to be here and my pleasure to welcome everyone who's joined us today. So as Kayana correctly mentioned, the first piece was inspired by Himalayas to Ocean, or I'll say H2O for short. H2O was a documentary project about climate change in Nepal, and it was partnered with the International Center for Integrated Mountain Development in Nepal and the Environmental Change Institute in Oxford. And the idea really behind the project was to complement the science developed by these institutes by using a mix of compelling audiovisual outputs combining photography, video, and sound. And the sounds were actually recorded by Nico. And so my view is that the science is absolutely critical to move forward and to address climate change, but we know that the science and facts on their own often aren't enough to resonate with people and to encourage behavior change. And on the other hand, when they're complemented with stories, with visuals, with sounds, and anything that really brings in the emotional and the experiential brain, well, we know that's much more effective in combination with the science at connecting people with a specific issue. And so for H2O, the idea was to follow one of the rivers in Nepal from the peaks in the Himalayas all the way to the floodplains. And through that, along the river, we documented 4 types of issues related to climate change. One was melting glaciers, the second was landslide, the third was access to water, and the fourth was flooding. And it's very much this second chapter, the landslide chapter, that really inspired the Earthflow piece. So what about landslide? What's the connection with climate change? Well, for one, we have to say that they occur naturally in Nepal, and in fact, they're a major source of disaster in Nepal. They account for about 30% of casualties. And part of the cause is natural, so it depends on the terrain itself, and naturally occurring rain. So when it rains, it can detach parts of the mountain. But there's also man-made causes, for example, land use. And we also know, and the science is showing, that because of climate change, the rainfall is becoming more intense and altitude. And so the combination of the two is causing more landslides. And for this chapter, this H2O chapter, we spent some time in a little village called Ulikola that has been affected by a major landslide. And this landslide has been happening for many decades, but it's been accelerating with climate change. And this is something that people were telling us. The rain is becoming more intense, more erratic, and this is contributing to accelerating the landslide. What happens when there is a landslide? Well, parts of the mountain detaches itself, and that creates damage directly for the people who live on the mountain or around the mountain. But it also creates another kind of issues. When the debris is taken away from the mountain, it can accumulate in the actual river, and that can cause flooding. And so now we have a video that was produced by Ross Harrison, who is part of the H2O project, that shares the stories of people in Ulikola.
Yeah. अब अहिले सपना देख्दाखेरि उनको देखिन्छ, यहाँको देखिँदैन। भित्रको पुरुषले उही माया माने हो मेरो चाहिँ। आफू जहाँ गए पनि भित्रका पुरुषले पनि उही जाति मान्दो रहेछ। आफू जहाँ जन्म्यो मेरो जन्मेको ठाउँ हो यो। जति पनि बनिया छ पानीबाट हावाबाट बन्छ। पानीबाट त मान्छे बाँच्दैन क्या। मान्छे बाँच्ने पानीका सहारा दियो। अघि जति पानी आउँदैन। कहिले आउँछ विचलित भएर आउँछ। पहिले जस्तो एकनासले आउने बढी आउँछ तर पानी एकनासले आइरहने। कहिले आउँदैन बढी आएर बिगार्ने, कहिले आउँदैन खडेरी पर्ने। पहिले जान्दाखेरि चलिया थियो। पहिरो त यो पहिरो बढ्दो छ। पहिला अलि सानो थियो नि, अलि धेरै बिग्रेर भयो। आउँदाखेरि जस्तो सिमेन्टले ढलाइ गर्दाखेरि घोल्छ, यहाँ मोटर बाटो बनाउन सकिया छैन पहिराले गर्दाखेरि।
पानी पर्ने बित्तिकै यो बाटो फेरि सिद्धिन्छ। यो बडीघाट भयङ्कर ठुलो भएर आयो। आइसकेपछि यहाँका घरहरू बगाएर यो आफूले देख्दा, अरूको घर बगाएको देख्दा सायद कति दिन खाना खान मिठो भयो। त्यो चिन्ता लाग्यो। ती जुन घरबार विहीन व्यक्ति कसरी बसेको होला, एउटा गरिब मुलुकमा, गरिब ठाउँमा आय स्रोत केही छैन।
गडम गुडुम गर्दै आयो के, अनि हामी भाग्ने बाध्यतै पर्यो त्यसमा। अब मुनिबाट आएपछि हामी राति भाग्यौँ उहाँबाट माथि, कोइराकोबाट माथि। अब बिहान उजेल हुन पाएन, अनि राति भागेर अनि तल गाउँमा आइयो। सामान त केही पनि स्याहार्नै भएको होइन, आफ्नो जति केही पनि छैन अहिले यतिखेर। डर लाग्छ, अनि पछि पिर पर्छ भन पिर पर्छ भन म के खुवाउने है बच्चाहरूलाई।
Don't we?
Here we go. Hello.
Are we here?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Welcome back. I know that there's been some technical problems in terms of watching the videos, the streaming videos. We're very sorry about that. If you want to do catch up, we will post this video later. So stay with us if you can. And if not, please feel free to go back to that YouTube video. It will be posted as well as on the Facebook page. But either way, we're going to move on for now, which is that we're going to talk now to Nico and Jakes about the commission and about the composition process behind Earthflow. I first came into contact actually with the Himalayas to Ocean project because of actually the really exciting photography that Elise did and the videography from Ross and the field recordings that Nico took. And that was all in an installation at the Tandem Festival. And that's when I kind of first saw it and I thought, this is incredible work, and it really resonated with previous projects that I had done called Water Science in the Thirsty World, which was a collaboration between the University of Oxford and Cornell University, as well as the Water Culture Women's Works commissioning series, which I've been running now for about 6-7 years. And Deborah Pritchard, right now, wonderful composer, has been commissioned to write the next in that series. And fingers crossed, we'll be able to premiere that in early or later 2021 when things open up again. So watch this space. But right now, I just wanted to turn to you guys and say, talk us a little bit about how you incorporated this whole idea of landslides into your composition.
So I was quite interested in the life cycle of the landslide itself. So I got in touch with, as well as the Himalayas to Ocean researchers, a researcher called Romy Schlegel, who sort of helped explain the different cycles of it and the stages of it. And actually the piece started coming together as patterns based around soil structure, which is super nerdy. That's how it is. So all of the sort of opening melodic sequences are all these little patterns that are based around different kinds of soil molecules and soil structures. So the piece kind of develops through the different stages of the Himalayas to Ocean expedition, that's the word. So it starts in this kind of high frozen glacial state, lots of harmonics, everything's very still. And then the melt begins, so these sort of soil molecule patterns start emerging and start moving as they mix with water. And then it eventually reaches the slide itself. So everything becomes mixed together, there's a lot of heavy motion. And at this point we also use some surround sound to create different movement. So throughout this piece there are field recordings from the Himalayas to Ocean expedition, which Nico recorded. And they are fed, when we did it originally live, they were fed through a surround sound system. Yeah. So when you move them between the speakers, they create this sort of pulse, because you swap which speaker the sound is coming from, so you kind of end up with this like whomp, 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 whomp sound. So that is where the kind of pulsing in the middle of the piece, which you'll hear in a bit, comes from.
And just to dive in, that was at, we were at the Ashmolean,
yeah.
Right, so 2019, we were very fortunate to have the gorgeous area in the Ashmolean with all these Greek statues, and Nico set up a surround sound system in there. We performed this piece live with you guys playing with the orchestra, which was really sweet.
So all these surround sound speakers or next to all these Ashmolean statues. It's like pumping bass happening everywhere. It was quite surreal. So it eventually ends up in the river. So things kind of calm. The debris has gone into the river, and we have a field recording of the river. Is there anything else we should say? Guess you're just going to have to listen to it.
So this is what was put together. That's the composition. What you'll see in this music video, and again, if you have technical issues, the music video is posted both on OSJ's webpage and Limit Space Race webpage, which you could, YouTube page. So you could even go to that now if you're having trouble with the resolution, and then we'll be back to discuss it. But Ross Harrison was the one, as we mentioned before, who had taken all that footage. So you're going to see his work both in the capturing of that footage in Nepal, but also in the artistic presentation of that. So thank you, Ross. It's a beautiful, beautiful piece. welcome back. Again, if for whatever reason where you were watching that was a little bit glitchy, Earthflow is posted on the YouTube channels of Orchestra of St. John's and Limbit Space Race. So you could definitely catch that up. But also, we are going to post this whole thing, at least for a while, so that you guys can go back and take a look if you've missed anything. But now, actually, I wanted to turn to Nico O'Brien, who has actually been, we're kind of a one-stop shop today. So Nico is doing all of the streaming stuff, as well as having done the recording oversaw the recording process this summer. So like I said, we were in Ovada Warehouse, which wasn't set up to be a recording studio. So of course we brought everything in. It was a new place for us. It was a new place for the musicians. But fortunately, this guy can deal with just about anything. So Nico is kind of the recording engineer, but also, being part of the recording process, because you did a lot of live processing. Can you just talk about what it was like to actually put all this together in July?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, it's great. It's great to be here, and I haven't really spoken yet, so I've just been worrying about all this stuff, all the technical side of things.
As usual.
Yeah, which tends to be my place. Don't do much of the talking. So, I mean, the recording process was quite a challenge. Initially, we had planned to write a piece which was going to be recorded by the musicians at home, and they were going to film themselves and record themselves, and then we were just going to deal with whatever sort of quality we received. And that was sort of part of the excitement in a way. But then as soon as the lockdown rules opened up, all the musicians, and including us, were like, we just want to do something together. Yeah. So in the space of very little time, we organised this huge recording session with 12 musicians. There was a 6-7 people crew, and we pretty much put all this together in about 10 days. It was great. We had a great team. Everything went really well. And so how did we go about it? It was quite a tricky place to work with, because obviously a lot of these sorts of instruments that we were working with are designed to be performed in quite different places than warehouses that used to be old tanneries. So, acoustically, it wasn't ideal. Obviously, there's also a lot of outdoor sounds that we were hoping that there wasn't going to be any drilling next door and all that sort of stuff. So we're quite lucky on that front, because we didn't have any disruptions. But so we tried multiple recording techniques, but mainly we just had a stereo pair, so that you're sort of listening to the orchestra in the way that Kayana hears it when she's conducting it. So you sort of have that privileged position. But what we also wanted to be able to do is to sort of be a bit less traditional in the way the sounds are put together, and have some more close mics on each instrument, to sort of change a little bit the perspective of the listener.
Is that going? Because we look a little bit paused.
We look a little bit paused then, don't we?
Yeah. Have we been recording that whole time?
We should be.
If you can see us right now, because somebody didn't change the battery.
No, the battery's going.
If you can see us right now, please bear with us. We seem to be experiencing another technical glitch, and we will be back with you soon.
Obviously, it has to be whilst I was talking. Okay, we're back.
When did it stop?
Who knows? Okay, great, we're back. I'm not too sure where it stopped, but hopefully the audio was still going throughout that. Obviously, it had to happen whilst I was talking. So where was I at? I was talking about the recording perspective, and the idea of we wanted to be able to change perspective and sort of zoom in and have some close-ups and of different instruments, and sort of get closer, sort of the pits sections and all that, so that and the plinky plonks, so that it was a bit close to the sound of water.
Nico,
yeah,
I'm going to interrupt you only because of our time and because we've got a lot to get through. Can I summarize?
Yeah.
So basically, if you missed what we said earlier, it was Nico went in with a big crew into an unusual warehouse. He kind of basically circumvented a lot of the problems, made sure we didn't have exterior sounds, but we managed to get really great audio. But there was some interesting challenges because everybody was spaced out and we didn't know what was going to happen, but it worked. Is that about right?
That's about right.
And the stereo pair, he mentioned the stereo pair. So if you are an audio engineer yourself, it was all about the stereo pair. And that'll be meaningful to you and probably not to the rest of us. But that's all right. Thank you very, very much for that. We are going to go on to the Reaching Water, if that's all right.
Yep.
Yeah, so the second piece, and so that was the first piece, as we had said before, had been recorded, performed earlier on, and after that was such a success, we said we really must do this again, and we had another wonderful project, which Elise happened to be a part of, as always. I don't know how you're always engaged in the really cool stuff that came across our paths. That is, it's organized by REACH, which is improving water for people in Asia and Africa. It's led by the University of Oxford, and Dr. Catherine Gresham, who isn't here with us today, is the kind of lead researcher on the social science bit of the project, which really inspired us. And so, Elise, will you kind of give us the introduction to the science behind Reaching Water, and then we will talk more about that composition.
Great. Thank you, Kayana, again. And so REACH is my full-time job. So it's great to be talking about that today. So as Kayana mentioned, the second piece is inspired by Dr. Catherine Gresham's research in Ethiopia as part of REACH. REACH is a global research program led by the University of Oxford to improve water security for people in Africa and Asia, and especially for people affected by poverty. So a little bit of, let's go into the jargony terms. What does water security means? Well, it means, in a nutshell, ensuring that people have access to clean water, clean and reliable water, but also that they're free from the risks of floods and droughts. And so this piece of research led by Catherine takes place in the Fantale district. It's a rural part of Ethiopia, and quite a poor part of Ethiopia. And people's lives and livelihoods in this area are very much tied to water. They're connected to and shaped by water. Access to water is a daily challenge, but also there are frequent floods and droughts. And the key point here is that climate change is already happening there and is exacerbating these issues. And so some climate scientists in the REACH program, their research is estimating that there will be a 10 to 25% decrease in river flows by the end of the century. So in an area that is already very scarce with water, that has so many implications. In terms of people accessing water, they already have to walk long distances to access water, and it's often done by women and children. So this, affects children's ability to go to school, but it also affects people's health. And also, people need to grow their food. And so having less water, so drought, but also excessive water, so flood, both affect their ability to grow food. So this piece was very much based on this research. And in November 2018, Catherine and I went to Fantale, and we captured stories from people who were affected by these sorts of issues. And so we have a short video to show you with photographs that I took, as well as a recording from some of the interviews that I took. So now we're going to move on to that and show the video.
Great. So we're watching the REACH video.
Yes.
Amma yeroon yoo aannan gaachisaanis lafa hin jiru. Yeroon ammaa garma deeman hundatu dur rooba jira xiqqoo taraa takka rooba sii kennee rooban xiqqoo wayyaa qabdi. Amma roobni hin jiru. Oduma deemtu bonaa yeroon oduma deemtuuf jibbaatta. Gaa bonaa faa giseen argamne qabdi gaa. Gisee bishaan sirraa fagaatan. Gisee deebisa. Yeroo ifa ganama haane galgala faa gallu qabna. Deemne. Akkasiin jirtutti gaafa gaannee deemnee hoggaa ganama faana galgala faa galla.
Haalli duraan qilleensaa daa'imummaa kiyyarraan kaasee gaafa daa'imummaa kiyyaa san roobninis hoggaadhaan osoo hin tanitti gizeedhaan.
Are you sure?
Yep.
So I hope you enjoyed that little snippet. There's lots more to learn about the REACH project. Again, they've got a gorgeous website with so much information, and that's linked to, it is wonderful. It's linked to actually on the OSJ We Are Water webpage. So a lot of the stuff we talked about today, you can find those resources through that webpage. And one of the things actually about this project when we were putting it together and thinking about it was, you know, in the middle of the pandemic. What are we going to do? And we really wanted to engage people from all over the world in this project as well. So some of you who are listening know exactly what I'm saying next. We put together an educational video. Actually, Dr. Gresham and Elise and myself got together, and we put together an educational video, which at the end sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself, which was about water security. And it was really directed towards young people to get them thinking about water consumption and how they relate actually to water in their lives and how that is reflected across the globe. So, but at the end of that video, we asked them to send in water recordings, anywhere, anything. And actually, it wasn't just the young people who sent in the water recordings. We got water recordings from everywhere. And those will have all actually gone into the Reaching Water piece, which Nico, in his kind of post-production, you managed to get them all in there one way or another. But as kind of a special treat, I want you guys to hear all of them because they're wonderful. Forgive me, I was the one that put together this video compilation. It is absolutely, the artistic component is cringeworthy, but the water sounds are fabulous. So if we can play everyone's contributions, that'd be brilliant. So all of those sounds, believe it or not, incorporated into the piece that you'll be hearing next. But before we hear that, let's go back actually to Olympic Space Race, and actually, I mean, I'll ask you to talk about the composition, how you approached it, but even just about your collaboration, like how you guys work together, because I know you have a system of divided labor.
Well, it depends what it is. So normally both of us do a lot of synth pop based things. But in this collaboration, the scoring and the orchestral side of things was mostly done by me. And then Nico did a lot of the field recording and also modular synth and all the kind of electronics. And then the post-production we did together.
Yeah.
So the idea behind this piece really came directly from those interviews we just watched. And I just found the interviewee talking about the long distances that have to be travelled to reach water and how they're so tiring, a really powerful statement, and I just wanted to kind of amplify that within this piece. So we've taken this quote directly, and you will hear it within the piece at the beginning, and then it gets fed through modular synth and kind of becomes part of the music. And a lot of the string lines themselves are built around this phrase and kind of the rhythms within it. So it's very much part of the music. And then the journey in the music itself is directly responding to this idea of this long journey. So it starts with this very sort of dry, oppressive feeling, basically by writing a lot of things which are really annoying to play. So lots of high harmonics, a horrible key, everyone for like really in the high register of their instrument. And then of course it's going all live when we're recording it all through Nico's modular synth, making these kind of textures, glitching out, specific instruments going straight through the synth as well. So you've got this very kind of layered oppressive texture. It then moves on to some sort of lusher chords and this pits figure, which is supposed to represent a mirage, which is common in the region, which is an illusion of water, before returning to this hot, dry, stressful stuff, back into the search for water. And eventually it opens out into sort of warmer chords. We've reached the water, there's pits, there's a new singing melody, and that's the point where all of these different water sounds that you just heard come in. And there's this kind of joyful rippling section just to really highlight the relief of reaching this water, the end of so many of these long journeys which are only becoming longer with climate change, before it returns back into the hot, dry return journey, and you hear Diro's voice once more as the piece comes to an end.
Well, I was actually just thinking the next video. So the video for this composition is of a completely different nature. So the first one was really that kind of artistic blending of different imagery from Nepal in particular, as well as little bits here and there of the orchestra playing. But the video for Reaching Water is actually of the recording process. So what you'll see is you'll actually see this live mixing, and you'll see the orchestra playing. So it's just preparing you at something entirely different, which is what we love to do. But it was funny for me as a conductor because I couldn't hear what the composition was going to sound like. Actually, I had no idea what these guys were doing in the corner. It was all going through their headphones as I was going to. So it wasn't until kind of the post-production process where all of that came together. But shall we go ahead and have a listen and have a watch? Yeah. So again, the YouTube seems like it's streaming a little bit better. So do pop over there if that's easier for you.
Yeah.
Oduma deemtu bona yeroon oduma deemtu. Oduma deemtu bona yeroon oduma deemtu.
So thank you all for staying with us through the end of Reaching Water. I can tell you that I absolutely love that piece, and it's been really exciting to work with this pair because they hear, well, first, they just hear the orchestra in an entirely different way. It's not necessarily things that I would have thought of to do. But so it's been really exciting for that collaboration to take place. Before we say anything further, there are a couple of questions that have come in, so we will answer your questions first. What was the one that you had said before?
The first question we have is coming in from Sarah O'Brien, saying, a massive amount of work has gone into this project. So impressive. Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you, Sarah.
I was wondering what you have learnt from all of this. Do you see water, how do you see water differently, and how do you access it differently?
That's a really good question. So Sarah, that's to us. How do we see water and how do we access it differently? Who wants to start? Oh, Jakes!
You're really
Jakes,
good.
Yeah.
You did.
I think for me, having already been quite water conscious in a general environmental way, I think it was really interesting to see the connection between water security and too much water, because I'd only really thought about it in terms of drought in a sort of traditional water shortage way, and then actually thinking about the flip side of flooding and the more extreme weather patterns that we're going to see with climate change was a new way of looking at it for me that I found really interesting. In daily life, just having less baths.
Yeah.
I think for me one of the main connections as well is not so much with the like day-to-day water usage, but more that how our day-to-day activities, particularly in this part of the world, like have a very strong impact all over. And I think that's not something it's talked about, but when you get the real stories and you get these very specific things, because sometimes it's hard to, well, maybe in England sometimes you do see these things with like increased floods, but there's no direct like effect on our lives. But when you're really at the margins of like sort of being able to live an okay life, then you know it does make a big difference if suddenly the weather patterns just change even slightly. And that's something that's I've definitely learned a lot about throughout these various projects, and been really interested in getting those real people stories rather than just the grand thing around science and all that.
And actually, I'll just jump on that, and that was very much my experience as well. So, you know, I come from more the academic side of things, and I've studied, you know, water security for a while now, and I've been working on this for a long time. So I've heard a lot of the science, the climate science, the, you know, water security, even from a social science perspective. But I think, you know, what you read in textbooks and what you read in academic paper is very different from the experience that you have if you go in the field. And I think that's sort of what, you know, Nico was alluding to. And when I managed to actually go in Ethiopia and speak with people, and when you're surrounded and, you know, you have people's experiences in front of you, and that is just so much more powerful than, at least at an individual level. And this is really what, you know, these pieces are about, from the photography to the music. It's about trying to convey the experiences to you know, help people connect with the issue. And yes, you know, we're facing less of these issues in the UK, but actually with climate change they will become more and more frequent. So this is something that, you know, we must be aware of. But again, on the flip side, climate change is happening everywhere, but you know, different people have different means of adapting, and obviously Ethiopia is a very different context from England. So these are all things to be aware of, and it's been really great actually working with artists to see how we can convey the science.
So I will say only one thing to that, which is, I guess for me, it has reminded me how vulnerable we are everywhere, especially when it comes to water security, and that can actually change on a dime, and it's changing rapidly. So it was, despite the fact that I've spent many years, decades thinking about water and thinking about my relationship to it, doing this project has really kind of up the urgency with regard to understanding how much this is a huge issue that we're going to be facing in a very short while coming up. But there were a couple of things that came in, I don't know about on the YouTube, but on the Facebook chat, there are some questions about the technical bits.
Yeah,
So there are two questions. One is from Heather Creasel that was asking what was in your headphones while you were conducting. That's a very interesting question. We laughed because we started off thinking that the conductor needed a click track, and we started recording with the conductor having a click track until the conductor's head exploded because nobody else. So usually when you do that, everybody else in the orchestra is also wearing a pair of headphones and has a click track coming in. In this case, the conductor was the only one that had the click track, and it just was not happening. So some of those shots that you saw from the montage basically were from those earlier takes, but actually we ditched that within the first 30 minutes.
What is a click track?
A click track. Oh, what is a click track? It's really,
For the non-musicians.
so it's a clock. It's like a metronome or a clock that just goes tick, 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 tick.
In
tick,
expressive
tick,
classical
tick.
music is a hard thing to stick to.
And then the other technical question, well, slightly technical question, comes from, and I'm sorry if I get this name wrong, I'm horrible. Tonchi Bakotin and Ruzia Franklin. Tonki Bakotin, Ruzia Franklin. That's an extraordinary name, and I'm sorry that I've absolutely really done it a disservice. But you ask, wondering how composers actually wrote the piece. Was it composed on sequencer and transcribed to notation, or was it already written as such? Over to you guys.
Great question.
Yeah, it is a very good question.
So it was different for both actually. The first one, it was all done with scoring. So just because so much of it was pattern based, it was kind of taking these ideas and like writing them out and moving them around. And the second one, the melody at the end, I just made humming. Just sort of came out in the first 5 minutes of trying to write the piece. So that was done just like recorded on my phone. And then the rest of the piece again was like scored and written around it. So I used the scoring software. And then for the field recording bits, we kind of made some mock-ups and did some practicing using Pro Tools, which is another digital audio.
Well, we did. There's
workstation.
different things we did, but like we also had a lot of conversations in the composition whilst we were composing it, and sort of discussing about, oh well, we want to put some field recordings. We need to how do we write the piece so that we allow some space for these sounds to come through.
There's always a lot of testing,
Yeah.
and particularly with the modular synth, which has a life of its own. There's a lot of things you have to try before you can write them down, because whatever you wanted to write is never going to come out in that way.
Yeah, so it's very much about the dialogue and a bit of to and fro, and
A lot of to and throwing, and then a lot of so much editing at the end. I think writing in the bow marks took longer than the entire writing of the piece.
So we have time for one more question. I've got one here on the Facebook. Do we have any more in the YouTube chat? I don't want to leave the YouTube. Okay. So Jeff Barker asks a very good question. This is actually probably for you guys. Again, just to follow up on this. It seems to me that much or most water available for global drinking water supplies comes from underground via wells. How would you imagine or orchestrate the sound of underground water?
Cool.
good question.
Ooh.
My initial thought would be to think about, because it's underground, you'd have some there's potential resonant cavities, and thinking about resonance, and it's just my first idea, but thinking about resonance and maybe also looking into resonance of the instruments and imagining that relationship between like a full like underground reservoir and a full instrument of water. Not suggesting we dunk a violin in the water, but like it could, there could be some thinking around the sort of changing of resonance in instruments and playing around with that. That would be my first.
Yeah, Elise has a thought.
Well, and no, just on that note, thanks for that point about water coming from groundwater as well. And in that situation, in the Fentale district, I should say that people use a diversity of sources. So groundwater is available. but the issue is that oftentimes, you need a hand pump to access groundwater, and that's, oftentimes you need electricity for that to happen, or oftentimes there is issues with the maintenance. So oftentimes it gets very difficult to access water through groundwater, and that's why people have to walk long distances to access water that is often of poor quality through rivers. So it isn't that there's one source of water, it's usually a combination, but oftentimes, at least in this situation, some of the people we interviewed prefer to actually access river water because the groundwater was not available.
And just quickly, just bouncing off that, as I jumped straight in with the resonance thing, I think if we were to do a project around underground water, I think, like with all these other compositions, we would really much think about the context of it and find out, like depending where it is, how people access it, and think about it on there, and then probably pick one idea that we think is going to be like a strong sort of channel to
we
sort of
always want
convey.
to be amplifying a story of some kind, someone else's story in these pieces.
Yeah, and speaking of these pieces, we've got pieces 1 and 2. We are optimistically planning pieces 3 and 4 in the future, and we're working to put those projects together. In the meantime, I would just say thank you again, huge thank you to our panelists, Elise, Jakes, and Nico, and a massive thank you to, actually, if you saw the credits, we'll roll them again. So many people have helped, chipped in to make this happen, given life, sweat, and blood and tears, although they ended up happy and smiling at the end, I assure you. To put nobody was harmed, no humans or what was harmed in the process. To put this together, so massive thank you to all of you, and to all of you who have come to listen to us today. It is just an honor to share our work with this audience, and so without saying anything, oh wait, I do have to say anything. I'm sorry. Right, thanking our sponsors, yes, and also. As part of this project, we're actually giving a one-off donation to the community, but then all of the money from the sales of the track. So if you go to Bandcamp, for example, and you download this track, we're collecting those funds and we are donating them to Water Aid. So any money that comes out of this project is going directly to help address water issues for everybody. So thank you very much for that. Do listen, do share. We appreciate all of the circulation, and I guess we say goodbye. Yeah?
I'll just quickly, before we said properly bye, a few people are asking about links and things like that, and we'll post all of those in the chat as soon as we're done here, and the video will be out tomorrow for Reaching Water, so you can watch it over and over and over and over again to your heart's content. So now we can say bye.
Now we can say goodbye. Thank you very, very much.
Bye-bye.
You're going to press the magic button, Nico.
Yeah.
Yeah. And thank you, Nico, for your technical assistance.